Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to be talking today about China. Yes. The title of the presentation, I'm sorry, I'm going to be speaking in English, if you don't mind. The title of the presentation is something that I've been asked time and time again. My name is Marcelo Careaga. I started in games 10 years ago in Shanghai, in China. I lived there for about 10 years, and I started to do my things in games on the Chinese market. I then moved from small outsourcing companies to working for Zynga in Beijing, and then Zynga in the United States, in San Francisco. And then from there, I ended up working where I am right now in a company called Miniclip in Lisbon. And curiously, 1 year after I arrived to Lisbon, we became part of the Tencent group. So we were basically invited to be part of the Tencent family. Tencent is the biggest game company in China, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and we've been doing really well so far. So what I do, my current job, has to do with taking games that are being made in the Chinese market, in the Asian market, and moving them, helping to move them towards the Western markets, the global stage. So one of the things that I get a lot every time that I talk with people about what I'm doing, about the kind of work that is happening, is, well, so I get it. So you work with China, but what is happening in China anyway? What is the situation there? Because China is a big market, but it's a market that is still very, very unknown for most of us. So I'm going to try to talk about this from a different perspective. I'm going to try to tell you a story. Try to tell a story about what is happening right now, what used to be happening like 1 year ago, what is happening right now, and what's going to happen in the future. Actually, I was talking with Antonio that when he talked to me about making this presentation, the situation was completely different. So the presentation that I had then was not at all what I'm going to be talking about now. So it was a lot of work to do this. So let's go on. So the first part is the beautiful part. It's a tale of growth and money. I hope you can see this in the back. I don't think you can see the small print, but I will talk through it. So this is probably the best graph that I can think about when it comes to the Chinese market. And it's showing a little bit of why we are all going there. We're all thinking about going there. In green, here, you have what is the global games market. You can see that the global games market has been growing steadily in the last few years. In blue, you have what is the Chinese market. The Chinese market is now, as of last year, 1/3 of all the global market of games. That kind of growth seems to be unprecedented and seems to be inescapable. It's been growing. If you see, these are the global game growth is in green, in blue, and the Chinese growth is in green. So you have a market that has been growing steadily over the past few years, to a point that in the last decade, in the last 10 years, is multiplied by 10. From 2.7 billion to almost $30 billion all in all. Most of this market is on mobile, as we'll see later, but there's still a lot of PC coverage. As of 2017, as of last year, the Chinese market is 1/3 of the global. It's bigger than the US, it's bigger than Japan, it's bigger than all Europe combined. And most of this growth has been on the mobile stage. Right now, we have about 800 million mobile users in the Chinese market only. And this is how the growth has been going on. This dark green is the growth of the mobile sphere. So what you can see is that in the last 5 years, the adoption of mobile games has been crazy. It has been really crazy. The history of the Chinese market, it's a bit strange history. The Chinese games market in general started with retro games, started with some things that you can see out there. But it was a very small thing. It was a thing that only certain people could actually afford, and so only certain people could actually play. And then there was a big explosion of the locally made games, But it wasn't until the advent of mobiles, of mobile phones, cheaper and more powerful mobile phones, that the market actually exploded. But there is a problem with this growth. This growth is not going to last forever. Mobile is approaching a ceiling. We're getting to a point that the Chinese market cannot sell more mobile phones. There's not more people to play games. They're getting to a point where it's actually becoming saturated. So the growth is going down. As you can see, the growth started on double figures, and it's been on double figures for a long time, but last year it already started to go to one figure only. And that trend is going to continue. We're not going to grow forever. We just can't. So how are the Chinese companies going ahead, or how were they going ahead? Well, monetization was the big thing, making more money out of the existing players. It was easy to get people to play. Now the problem was getting people to pay. When I started in the game industry in China, the problem was for companies like Blizzard, for example, to get people to pay for World of Warcraft. The problem was for Western publishers and for Chinese publishers to get Chinese users to actually put money in the market. That has changed, and that has changed dramatically with many things, with the growth of the economy, with making payments easier. So monetization has been one of the moves forward. But also right now, there's a lot of new initiatives looking to break barriers that already exist in the market, and they're trying to go through them. One is the console market. Consoles are banned in China still. There is an unbanning of certain consoles right now. PlayStation is making their entry on the Chinese market. This is getting there, but they're expensive. They're difficult to acquire, and the games that get published are few and far between. The reasons of that we'll talk about them later when we talk about regulation. The second avenue of growth is instant games. It's what I like to call the unholy marriage of chat applications and games. Now that's all the rage in China, and it's starting to come to Facebook instant games. We're seeing that in the West right now. People chat, people talk with each other, and now people play games with each other. So, you know, there's always new ways of losing your time, I guess. And then there's the going for markets elsewhere, outside of China, to East Asia, to Japan, to Korea, and now to the West. We've seen a lot of companies, including Tencent, publishing games in the West, or trying to get a piece of the global market, or even buying companies in the West. So this situation it's been like the companies in China are trying to move outside, are trying to cover more ground. But the question for many companies that are outside is, okay, who is playing in China? Who is the Chinese player? Well, first thing that we need to understand is that everybody plays in China. It's not like it is in the West. And when I mean everybody plays, that everybody plays. If you see, out of the people that are online, out of the people that have internet connection, 76% of the male population play games. 66% of the female population play games. That is a huge figure compared to what is in the West. The ability and the easiness with which the Chinese population has taken on to playing games on mobile, it's been really crazy. And that has come, at the beginning, came with a particular gender mix. We have a lot of male players playing PC browser and PC client games, but with mobile in particular, we're seeing the gender mix getting equalized across the board. And as you can see in here, we have a lot of very young population playing, a lot. And those players are not just casual players. We'll see that later. They are also very hardcore players. So we have a very healthy mix of people going into this. So mobile gaming, it's attracting a lot of population across all genders and across all structures of society. So as you can see, it's not just on playing. 68% of all online population watches game-related streams. Streaming is all the rage right now, even more than it is in here. Most of that streaming is on mobile. As opposed to what happens in the West, most of that streaming is happening on mobile. Tencent, we estimate that there's around there's going to be, at the end of this year, around 300 million esports fans in China. Some of the biggest TV shows, some of the biggest, let's say, media shows in the last year in China have been game-related streams, like the inaugural match of the biggest Honor of Kings championship in China was one of the most followed programs ever in the country. And if you can see, I know you cannot see this one, but in terms of male-female ratio, what we find is that in China there's a lot of hardcore players, like the hardcore market for mobile is divided almost equally. About last year it was already 45 to 55, so we're getting to a very good position there. So how is the Chinese player? What do they do? What are what kind of thing they like to do? So the first thing that we need to understand is that Chinese players in general, and we're talking here very generally, they are firstly social, very, very social. People play games because their friends play games. And they get really competitive. There's a lot of, this is the reason why everybody watches esports streamings, because everybody gets really competitive on these games. They are harder to convert. So when we look at numbers in terms of how we can convert those players to payers, it's more difficult. But once you convert them, they usually spend more money. And they usually keep spending for longer periods of time. They're very resilient to pay-to-win dynamics. Pay-to-win is kind of a dirty word in the West. When you do a mobile play, a competitive game, be it on PC, be it on console or mobile, one of the worst things that you can say to a developer is, oh, this is getting too pay-to-win. Well, yeah, but the Chinese market is not like this. Pay-to-win is expected. I wouldn't say that it's desirable, because maybe that's too much, but it is expected, and the people are very resilient to it. It is something that it's almost embedded into how they think about these games. They're in general more hardcore, if you want, than the Western counterparts. I don't particularly like the word hardcore because it denotes something I really don't like too much. But they are more dedicated to games than Western counterparts. One thing that I always mention is it's difficult to understand from outside the scale of some of the games there and how they become cultural icons. There was this game that Tencent launched 2 years ago that was called, it's called Honor of Kings. It's called Arena of Valor, which in my opinion is a really bad name, in the West. It's a kind of a multiplayer, it's a mobile MOBA game. It's basically very similar to League of Legends. Maybe I shouldn't say this on stage with the cameras rolling, but it's very similar to League of Legends. And Tencent has been pushing it forward really hard. In the Chinese market, Honor of Kings has gotten to about 300 million players every month. 300 million people. That is a lot of people. And the thing is that it became a cultural icon. Like, everybody plays it. I know people from my generation, from older generation, from younger generation that play it. Girls, boys, it doesn't really matter. Everybody was playing the game at some point. The thing is, that is the kind of game that when we look at it to publish, like when I look to publish games from the Chinese market to the West, I look at a mobile game on mobile and I say, okay, this is too hardcore for the players in the West. Nobody's gonna play this. Nobody's gonna want to play a League of Legends on mobile because the League of Legends players are gonna want to go to PC. They're not gonna want to go to mobile. And that is mostly true. There's a growing population on mobile that is getting more hardcore, but in China is what it is. So who's benefiting from this market? Well, mostly us, mostly Tencent. Tencent and NetEase. Tencent and NetEase are the two biggest companies in China in terms of games. And as you can see there, this is Tencent, this is NetEase. That one is others. And out of the others, well, most of the others are local companies. Only 20% of revenues come from foreign companies, out of that others part. And 14% is from South Korea. There's about a 5% from Japan. And about, the rest is mostly US. Why does that happen? Well, one part of things is because China is a very culturally aware country, and they have a very specific culture, they have a very specific way of doing things, they have a very specific way of being, And it's been a closed country for a long time. So there is a lot of market reasons, cultural reasons why Western games do not resonate with the Chinese player. But that's just part of the story. The other part, and this is where we're getting into the delicate part, is regulations, is the Chinese government. And this is where I hope that my next visa to China is not blocked because of this. Because the second part of what I'm going to talk about is the winter of the game industry. All this that we've talked about is the growth, is the beautiful part. It's the part where we were all making money and everybody was happy and the industry was growing at a tremendous pace. Only in the Guangzhou, Shenzhen area, for example, in the south, close to Hong Kong, there's an estimated, or there was an estimated at the end of 2017, there was an estimated of 700, 750 game companies making games, making different things on games, only in that area. But something happened. First, let's talk a little bit about the regulation in China. First, the first basic thing. Games cannot be directly published in China. In the West, it's different. In the US, in Europe, you have to go through regulations. Of course, you have to go through, PEGI. You have to go through a bunch of things. But you can publish whenever you want, whenever you feel like. You just have to, go to Steam, pay a fee, go to Apple, and get your game out. In China, that doesn't happen. Games cannot be directly published. Even more basic than this, games are considered what they call an internet cultural activity, which means that foreign companies are forbidden to actually directly publish games in China. As a foreign company, you cannot publish a game in the Chinese market without going through a Chinese partner first. There is a loophole on this that I'm not going to talk about, which is on the App Store. You can use the App Store to actually publish your games, but you don't really want to do this because even though we said there's a lot of mobile players, remember, 89% of people do not have an Apple phone. They have Android phone. So, So, in the end, all games needed, and I say needed, well, knowingly, a license and a publishing number, the same as books, the same as an ISBN book, from the State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television. That was the original situation. Actually, it's a bit more complicated than this because there's actually two government institutions that license games. One is the SARFT, and there's another one, and both do slightly different things. One of them allows you to publish in the market, and the other one allows you to make money from it. So you can get licensed to publish, to get the game out and to get users, but maybe not to actually make money from it, which is still bad. In 2017, there was about a bit short of 10,000 licenses approved for publishing in China. Almost all of them were local games, and all the Western companies were going through a Chinese partner. And then came March 2018. That was not too long ago. So this was the previous situation. We had this dual approval, the State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television, which now is called the National Radio and Television Administration. Don't worry about this. This is just bureaucracy. And the Ministry of Culture and Tourism are the ones that could publish games. And other agencies, including like national security agencies and stuff like this, could intervene if some games were, doing something crazy. And there's an expected new state. So the government is changing this thing, is changing all this. And they have this plan to centralize all the approval on what they call the State Administration of Press and Publication, which is dependent from a very funny named department that is the Central Propaganda Department, which, well, it doesn't bode very well. So, on March 2018, all approval of games was suspended, which meant that no new numbers were given. The only games that could actually go into the market were those that had numbers from before approved, and even those, they had to go through certain oversight. And the initial idea was that we're going to suspend this, and all the industry was expecting, okay, so if by March this is suspended, by the summer we'll get new regulations and we can crack on with it. Well, we are in December now, and there's no end in sight. There is no new regulation, which means that for the last, well, I don't know, 10 months, there is no new games approved for the Chinese market. This is basically putting a halt in the whole market. They've stopped everything. So what happens? What is the aftermath of this? Don't ask. So first, this is the period that we have the slower growth in a decade. We've gone down to growing only 5.2%. Only 5.2% in the first half of the year is going to be significantly below 10% by the end of the year because there's no new games coming out. There is a stock price consequences. Remember that we said that Tencent and NetEase had the biggest pieces of the pie? Well, most of the companies that are in the stock market, game companies in the stock market, have been losing a lot of money. Tencent's own price has dropped 14% only in the last few months. We'll see, it's actually lost half of its value on stocks in the last year, and that is really scary for a lot of things. There is even an effect outside of the Chinese game market because there was a lot of companies outside doing a lot of money into the Chinese market. So Japan and Korea are feeling also the effects of the freeze on what's happening there. This is the Tencent case. I know this graph is boring, but this is the stock price from the high before March to what it is now. It's just half the price. In the Tencent case in particular, there's a few things that I would like to point out. First is the curious case of Monster Hunter. I don't know if you heard about this. Monster Hunter Online was published by Tencent through an agreement. Was published by Tencent after March, not too long ago. It lasted 5 days in the market. After 5 days, the government decided that, no, that was not a kind of game that we want to have in the market, so let's get it out. So we had to get it out. Tencent had to get it out. You can imagine the consequences that this has for agreements, for marketing campaigns that have already been done, for a lot of different things. Then there was the amazing mystery of PUBG. PUBG, I guess you all know PUBG, is one of the biggest PC games. Tencent invested a lot of money in making 2 versions of PUBG for the mobile market. They got them out after a lot of effort. I know personally a lot of people that were involved on making this and crunching all the time for the last few months. They got the games out, and the games are out, but they cannot be monetized. Remember that we talked about before about the 2 different approval processes? So PUBG is out in the Chinese game market. Everybody's playing it. Nobody's making any money out of it because we literally cannot make any money out of it. The lesson from this for a lot of companies was that Tencent was not untouchable. Tencent is, just to give a bit of context, is in the context of the Chinese market, it's bigger than Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter combined, and WhatsApp, because they also have a WeChat chatting application. They are the biggest, they were the biggest, so they are the biggest, we are the biggest tech company in Asia. So there was this perception that Tencent was untouchable to an extent, that it was difficult for the government to go against something that was so powerful in the market. But the thing is, nobody is untouchable in the market. And the government has made very, very clear that this is the situation. So the question that remains is, okay, why did this happen? Did the game companies do too much too soon? They pushed the envelope too much on many things. The excuses from the government, the ideas from the government is they are doing this, they're freezing the regulations, they're putting new regulations in place to protect children, because it's always about protecting children. It's about gambling, it's about protecting children from addiction, it's these kind of things. The reality is more complicated than that. I'm not going to go into details in there, but the reality is significantly more complicated than that. There's internal battles inside the government. There is a big battle that is happening right now in China for the control of cultural publications and a little bit of censorship too, although that's still a very bad word. But anyway. So what are the consequences for the industry? Well, the gaming industry, we all know how it is. It's a hit-driven, it's a numbers-driven industry. If you are as good as your last success. If you don't have a lot of failures in a row, you have no more money. You have no more money, you have to fire people. We never want to fire people. So for small companies in particular, and the Chinese market is built out of indie developers, small companies that are making games for the bigger ones. Tencent has 40,000 plus employees in China. Not all of them do games, of course. There's about 5,000, maybe 6, I don't know, that make games only. There's a few studios that Tencent owns, and they produce a lot of games every year, but that's not enough. They get a lot of games from the indies. But the indies are, as many of you probably know, always strapped on for money. They always need a publisher. They always need money coming in. And the cash has frozen in China. So the crunch is on these small companies. And there's an effect of shrinking workforce. So everybody is, what is happening right now in the markets and what's happening to the people that I know there, everybody is either losing their jobs or fearing that they will. Or looking at other things. And there is a big impact on low levels of protection for employees. If you think that the situation, the workforce situation of the games industry in the West, it's bad and unprotected, man, you should see how it is in other places. And of course, share prices have an impact. Remember that thing about the Tencent share price that seems to be so, far for, it's just finance people. Well, Tencent and other companies have been paying bonuses in the last few years through stock. So if you worked very hard, you get Tencent stock, or you get NetEase stock, or you get somebody else's stock. So what happens when the price of the shares tank? Your savings tank. And that's something that is happening for a lot of people. So the immediate effect that what is going to happen in the market is there's a big process of consolidation, of small companies getting absorbed into bigger companies or just disappearing. And there's a big destruction, there's a fear of a big destruction of the indie substrate substrate? Well, anyway, to the industry. So the actual engine that moves the industry is disappearing. And the big ones, they have their own problems. Tencent, NetEase, usually used to be the companies that everybody knew that they could get work in there. Everybody knew it, because they're always hiring. Now that's not true anymore. So, what is the end of this fairy tale? Do we have a happily ever after, or we don't? Well, we're still thinking about where do we go from here. There is still value in the market. Of course there's still value in the market. Players want to play. People want to play games. They're still playing games. Revenues are still going up. The numbers are still there. We've seen the numbers. So there is this consolidation process that we can only hope that it won't be too bad for the industry in the long run, that it may actually be positive because you will get stronger companies out of this. We cross our fingers. But we have to expect with this that new approvals, after the approvals come in, probably in March next year, maybe in September next year, they're going to be more difficult. The government is not going to allow an unregulated situation. It's not going to lift their hands from the industry. They are going to get tougher on what gets published and what not. So the move is outwards. Chinese developers and Chinese publishers are prioritizing, and they must prioritize, a global market. Steam is one way that they're moving out. I don't know if you look at your Steam recommendations every now and then. But lately, I've been finding more and more Chinese games in there. Sometimes even Chinese-only games in there. One of the reasons is because publishing on Steam is a cheap avenue of getting a game out and getting some money back in. And indies there are strapped for money, so they're going through the avenues that they can. Steam is still not banned, but not allowed in China at the same time. It's kind of like it's like a quantum Steam. It's kind of in a gray area where we don't know. We know that it's going to get banned at some point. We don't know exactly when. So in the meantime, well, we're all trying to do something there. Mobile, of course, it's mobile in the West. It's an avenue for Chinese companies, but the problem is the markets are significantly different. What works in China doesn't work here. So there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of implementation of new things, there's a lot of learning that's needed. A need for publishings and publishers and optimization and servers and things that many companies there are not too aware of. So consolidation in the end is going to be even more weight on the market is going to be on publishers, on people that can take games from there and move them to the West. Or at least that's what I hope, because that's what I work on. So I'm going to look at the bright side in here. This is funny. There is a gray market, by the way. You remember I told you that there's this thing about license numbers for games? Well, some companies got really wise, and they got games approved on very generic premises, and now they're selling those numbers to the highest bidder, which is an interesting way of making money, but it's not going to last too. So the expectations for next year is that we're going to have only 4,000 to 5,000 licenses approved, even if we get the approvals on March. So the question that everybody has, do we enter this market? How do we enter this market? Do we even want to enter the market? Well, it does make sense. Like, we still have the numbers, we still have the audience, we still have the growth. It's still there. It's a huge source of players. So we want to enter the market, of course. And for Western companies, regulation changes may actually level the playing field and make Western companies more suitable for the market in a way, if they can abide by the regulations. So how? Well, this is just a very short fast-fire type of thing on how to get into that market. So identify a publisher and an audience. What do you want? Which type of player do you want to target? You have to build into cultural relevancy. You cannot do something that Chinese players are not going to understand. You have to do something that is culturally relevant for them, even if it's not culturally relevant for you. Invest on PvP, cosmetics. PvP, did I say PvP? Player versus player, multiplayer, you have to have that for the market if you want to succeed on the long term. You have to learn from what is successful right now on the market. Culturalize, do not just localize. It's not about translation anymore. Translation is one piece of the puzzle, but culturalization is the bigger thing. So it doesn't matter if you translate things properly if you don't make them culturally relevant. And if you want to go into a Chinese market, please be prepared for testing and testing and failing and failing. Being a bigger market, even as big as China is never a guarantee of success, neither for local players or for external players. So that's my Chinese market 101 type of presentation. So I hope that you got something from it, even if it's just the idea that it's hard. So if you want to talk more about this or about anything else, that's my Twitter handle and my email. Feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions, please go ahead. And I think I've been really good on time. Hay un micro. Sorry.
No, bueno, ahora sí. Bueno, si no hay... ¿Seguro que no hay ninguna pregunta del público? Vale, yo sí tengo una. Esto lo hemos hablado alguna vez, pero creo que es interesante. Muy bien. Steam, como dices, es un mercado gris. Todo el mundo está publicando juegos en Steam pensando a ver si lo peto en China. Puedes publicar tu juego, traducirlo al chino y ponerlo al alcance del mercado chino. Muy bien. ¿Cómo se hace para promocionar un juego en China? No hay medios de comunicación como tal. Los youtubers, pues hay unos cuantos youtubers en Taiwán. Y poco más. Hasta ahora lo único que yo he visto es mándale a los youtubers de Taiwán y cruza los dedos a ver si hay suerte.
Tristemente, es así para todo el mundo. Incluso los estudios chinos que están publicando en Steam están teniendo que hacerlo de un modo bastante bajo mano. Se publica allí, pero Steam no tiene específicamente un motor de búsqueda para el mercado chino. No tiene un sistema de discoverability. Es por esto que no hago las presentaciones en español, porque el inglés sale. Descubrimiento. Es complicado. La única manera es a través de youtubers. La cosa es, YouTube en China está bloqueado. Si quieres entrar en el mercado chino, no puedes hacerlo con YouTube. Tienes que hacerlo con Youku, tienes que hacerlo con otras herramientas. Tienes que hacerlo con los streamers. Streaming en China es brutal cómo ha subido, cómo ha crecido. Pero ¿cuáles son esos programas o esas plataformas? Eso podemos hablarlo después. Hay muchas, pero son muy locales. y llegar a acuerdos con ellas es complicado. Desde mi punto de vista, la única manera en que the only way that an external studio that comes from outside of China can actually be successful on Steam or any other platform in China is through Chinese partners. I know that it sounds very much of a governmental speak, because the Chinese government always wants a Chinese partner, but in this case, it's important because there is too many things that we don't know as Western players when we go to a Chinese market. So who is the relevant people? Who are the celebrities? Who are the people that can actually promote this? Which avenues, which software, which programs go through a Chinese publisher? But for that, you need to make your homework. You need to look at who is the people that are actually targeting a similar market to yours. There's not too many.
Is Twitch banned too in China?
Sorry?
Twitch.
Yeah.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Bueno, sí, por ahí. Siempre que tengo que preguntar yo la primera para que la gente se anime.
¿Las licencias que se otorgan tienen algún tipo de... O sea, ¿tienen alguna forma de controlarlas? ¿La eligen al azar? ¿Es el gobierno el que decide todo?
El gobierno decide todo. Can I reply in English? Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
So the licenses that are given there are always government issued, always. What usually happens is that the relevant part of the government will take the game a few months before, will take the bunch of documentation on what do you expect the game to be, and will examine, okay, is this non-violent, it's not too violent, is it not too anti-revolutionary? I know it sounds weird, but it's what it is. Is this relevant for the market? Is this acceptable? The problem is that there's not a fixed set of rules that you can abide to. There's certain rules that you know. For example, I remember that in a different life, in my time, there was this World of Warcraft expansion that came out in the West, that contained some skeleton armies, like skeleton type of enemies, and it was all the rage. The publisher that was working with Blizzard back then in China was a company called The Nine. They tried to get this approved by the government, and the government said, there's too much bones in the skeletons, you have to cover them up. So they had to change the whole game in order to have clothes on the skeletons. It's small things like this. But that delayed the launch of that expansion. World of Warcraft was the biggest game in China at that point in time, but it delayed that launch for about 6 to 9 months, just on that small thing. You don't really know. It's always government. It's always going from the government. Before, people used to assume that if you go to the bigger publishers, to NetEase or to Tencent, you will get fined because they have good relationship with the government. That's just not true anymore. So you have to abide by what the government says. There's no other way.
Tenemos tiempo para una última pregunta que hay por aquí. Ya tienen micro, magnífico.
Buenas.
Hola.
Nosotros estamos desarrollando un juego basado en España, pero la mecánica principal es que usas una Super 8 con la que resuelves puzzles. Hemos visto que en el mercado chino, en el mercado asiático, mejor dicho, está teniendo muy buena recepción. Bueno, la demo que publicamos tuvo muy buena recepción porque todo esto de aparatos antiguos malditos les mola mucho. El tema es que nuestro juego se basa en la España del norte. También creemos que es un punto a favor porque España llama mucho en Asia. Lo que te quería preguntar es cómo choca eso con lo que has hablado de la localización, no hacer localización, sino culturalización. Porque nosotros queremos mantener marca España, digamos, porque es lo que llama. Creemos que puede llamar en Asia, pero, claro, no podemos hacer culturalizar.
En general, y eso es desde mi punto de vista, en general, it's more about not going against what is acceptable in Asian markets than about changing your game to be all about Asia. I'm not saying that you should change the theme of your game to be, Three Kingdoms stuff, or, Northern China instead of Northern Spain, which is not the same, really not the same. But you should, you can keep your own identity, but you have to be careful not to step on any toes. You have to be careful not to talk about certain stuff or about, political situations or about stuff like this. But it's more about if you have a specific image, if you have a specific thing that differentiates you from the rest, use it. That's fine. Use it. Just don't expect people to actually understand what it is. Because the amount of people that are actually going to know where Spain is, or what Spain is, or even where north of Spain is going to be very small. So you have to build it in a way that allows people to identify with it, even though it may be from a very different place. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Bueno, no tenemos tiempo de esta charla para más. Un aplauso para Marcelo, por favor.
Thank you.